In a quiet park, where laughter usually echoes through the swings and slides, one little girl's tears changed everything. A poor nanny, with nothing but kindness in her heart, stepped in to comfort her, unaware that the girl's father was a powerful millionaire CEO. What followed was a story of compassion, hidden truths, and unexpected destiny. Before we dive into this emotional journey, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. The park was not a place Lily usually had time for. Between her shifts at the nursing home and the long bus rides across the city, moments of quiet were rare. But that afternoon, the golden light stretched across the benches and pathways, softening the edges of her exhaustion. She sat for a moment, clutching her worn handbag, and let herself breathe. That was when she heard it. The faint, broken sobs of a child. She turned, expecting a parent nearby. Instead, on a bench a few steps away, a little girl sat hunched forward, her tiny shoulders trembling with each breath. She couldn't have been older than 6. In her arms she cradled a stuffed bunny, its ears frayed and one button eye missing. It was a sight that stopped Lily. She had cared for children in passing. Neighbors, cousins, the elderly with childlike fragility. But this was different. The girl's tears were not from a scraped knee or a fleeting tantrum. They carried the sound of fear. Lily approached slowly, her shoes crunching against the gravel. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down. The girl stiffened, pulling the bunny closer. Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, met Lily's only for a moment before darting away. "It's okay," Lily whispered. "You don't have to talk. I just thought, maybe you didn't want to sit alone." For a while, the girl said nothing. The air filled instead with the distant chatter of families, the bark of a dog chasing a stick, the rustling of leaves. Lily stayed, patient, her body angled so she wasn't looming. Slowly the girl's shoulders eased just a little. "What's her name?" Lily asked, nodding toward the stuffed bunny. The girl hesitated, her lips parting in the smallest of whispers. "Mimi," Lily smiled. "Mimi looks like she's been on a lot of adventures." The child's fingers stroked the worn fabric. She nodded faintly, as if remembering the journeys that Toy had survived with her. It was a tiny bridge between them, fragile but real. Minutes passed before the girl finally murmured, "I don't like when he leaves me." Lily's heart tightened. She didn't ask who he was. The fear in the child's voice said enough. "You know," Lily said gently, "sometimes grown-ups get busy, and they forget that little hearts can feel big things. But that doesn't mean they don't care." The girl looked at her for the first time with searching eyes, as if weighing whether to trust the stranger's words. "I'm Lily," she added, offering a small smile. "I don't have a Mimi, but I used to have a bear named Toby. He helped me when I felt scared too." Something in the child's expression softened. The tears slowed, replaced by a silence that felt less like distance and more like listening. Before either could speak again, a voice cut through the air. Firm, controlled, searching. "Susan!" The little girl flinched. She clutched Mimi tight, shrinking against the bench. Lily turned to see a man striding down the path, his suit too sharp for the casualness of the park, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes, cold steel gray, locked onto the child. Relief flickered across his face, though it was quickly masked by frustration. "There you are," he said, kneeling before his daughter. "I told you not to wander off." Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing. The man exhaled sharply, then glanced up at Lily, noticing her for the first time. His gaze was quick, assessing. Lily felt suddenly aware of her worn shoes, the frayed strap of her handbag, the faint trace of fatigue etched into her face. "I found her crying," Lily said quietly, unsure if she should speak. "She seemed frightened." The man's jaw tightened. "Thank you," he replied, the words polite but clipped, as though spoken out of duty rather than gratitude. He reached for Susan's hand, but the girl recoiled, pressing closer to Lily instead. It was a moment so small it could have been missed. But to Lily it was everything. A child choosing the comfort of a stranger over her own father. The man's expression faltered. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, revealing not anger but something else. Guilt, perhaps, or pain buried too deep to surface easily. He straightened, adjusting his sleeve. "I'm James," he said finally, though his tone suggested he rarely introduced himself. "Susan's father." Lily nodded. She did not recognize the name nor the wealth it carried. She only saw a man with walls around him, and a little girl suffocating inside those walls. Susan clung tighter to her bunny. James stood tall, his shadow stretching long across the path. And Lily, caught between their silence, could not know that this chance encounter in the fading light would entwine their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. What began as a moment of compassion on a park bench would soon unravel into a collision of two worlds: the weary resilience of a poor young woman and the guarded wealth of a man whose fortune touched nearly every corner of the city. For now, though, it was just the three of them: the child, the father, and the stranger who had dared to sit beside her. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the park in amber, the quiet held a weight that none of them could yet name. The mansion did not look like a home. From the outside, it was a fortress of clean lines and glass panels, rising above the quiet street like a statement. Its size spoke of success, but its silence spoke of something else, an emptiness money could not disguise. When Lily stepped inside for the first time, holding Susan's hand gently in her own, she felt the difference immediately. It was not the scale of the rooms or the gleam of marble floors. It was the way the air carried no laughter, no warmth, only order. James walked ahead, his presence filling the hallway without effort. He was a man accustomed to moving through boardrooms and commanding attention, but at home his steps seemed rehearsed, almost mechanical. He led them into a wide living room where walls of glass opened to the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but to Susan, it meant nothing. She perched on the edge of a sofa, Mimi pressed against her chest, her eyes distant. "She's been quiet," Lily said softly, unsure if speaking was overstepping. "I think she's lonely." James's shoulders tensed. He did not turn to face her, instead adjusting his cufflinks as if the detail required his full focus. "She has everything she needs," he replied flatly. Lily glanced around. The shelves were lined with art, awards, and photographs of James shaking hands with people in suits. But there were no drawings, no toys scattered on the floor, no trace of a child's life filling the space. "Sometimes it isn't about things," Lily said gently, her voice careful. For the first time, James looked at her properly. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied her as though she had broken an unspoken rule. And yet there was something in his gaze. Not anger, not disdain, but the flicker of a man unsure how to answer. Susan shifted, leaning closer to Lily as though silently casting her vote. It was enough to make James pause. That evening, Lily stayed longer than she had planned. She found herself sitting on the floor with Susan, building small towers with wooden blocks from a box tucked away in the corner of a cabinet. The girl's laughter, soft and hesitant at first, began to fill the room like fragile music. James watched from across the space, pretending to read through documents, though his eyes strayed more often than the papers allowed. He was not used to seeing his daughter smile this way, not since her mother's absence. Later, as Lily gathered her things, James spoke again. His voice was quieter this time, the edge softened. "She doesn't usually open up to people. Not even with me." Lily hesitated at the door, unsure if he expected an answer. "Children know when someone is really listening," she said finally. "That's all." It was a simple observation, but it lingered with him long after she left. Days became weeks, and Lily's presence shifted from temporary to essential. She arrived each afternoon, her footsteps light against the marble floors, carrying with her something the mansion had long been starved of: presence. She baked cookies with Susan in the oversized kitchen, her laughter echoing against steel appliances that had never known warmth. She read stories aloud in corners where silence had been the only companion. Slowly, the child who once clung to Mimi as her only comfort began to reach for Lily's hand instead. James noticed it all. He told himself it was good for Susan, that perhaps this young woman filled a gap he could not. But in quieter moments, when he caught himself lingering in the doorway as Lily brushed Susan's hair or wiped crumbs from her cheek, he realized the truth. The home felt alive in ways he had forgotten it could. Yet for every moment of light, there was tension beneath the surface. James lived in a world where vulnerability was weakness, where every decision was measured, every word carried weight. To rely on someone outside that world felt dangerous. Lily's presence unsettled him, not because she was unwelcome, but because she made him confront what had been missing. One evening, after tucking Susan into bed, Lily found herself in the kitchen, washing a few dishes she insisted didn't need a housekeeper's attention. James entered, loosening his tie, his expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and thought. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. Lily glanced up, smiling faintly. "Old habits. My grandmother always said, 'Leave a place better than you found it.'" James leaned against the counter, studying her. "You're different from the people I usually have around." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied lightly, though her eyes held seriousness. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of a clock. Then Susan's small voice echoed from the hallway. "Daddy?" James straightened instantly, crossing the room in long strides. Susan stood in her pajamas, Mimi in her arms, her eyes uncertain. She looked not at her father but at Lily. "Stay," Susan whispered. James froze, watching as his daughter reached for Lily. The child's trust, so freely given to the woman he barely knew, pierced deeper than any criticism could. He realized then that the walls of glass around his life did not only keep the world out, they kept his daughter in. As Lily lifted Susan and carried her back to bed, James stood in the doorway, silent. For the first time, the empire he had built with precision and control felt less certain. A stranger had walked into his home and, without intention, begun to dismantle the distance he had crafted between himself and his own child. And though he would not yet admit it, something inside him had shifted. The next morning, the city was buzzing with its usual rhythm: car horns, hurried footsteps, and the chatter of street vendors. But for Clara, the world felt unusually heavy. Sleep had been elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophie's trembling hands clinging to her dress, and the sharp, protective voice of the man who had stormed into the park. She sighed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she adjusted the fraying strap of her handbag. Her next nanny job interview was across town, at a small cafe, and she couldn't afford to miss it. Rent was due, and every coin mattered. Yet as she hurried along the cobblestones, a thought gnawed at her. Why was Sophie so scared? What kind of man lets his daughter cry like that? Clara tried to shake it off. It wasn't her place. She was just a stranger who stumbled into the moment. Still, her heart whispered otherwise. Inside the cafe, Clara sat nervously at a corner table waiting for the prospective employer. A middle-aged woman arrived, polished and proper, carrying the air of someone who measured people by their shoes and watches. The woman's eyes swept over Clara's thrift store blouse and worn shoes. A frown tugged at her lips. "I appreciate you coming," she said curtly, "but we're looking for someone with more experience in high-profile families." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to say she was good with children, that she had raised her siblings after their mother died. But the woman was already standing, her expensive perfume lingering like a bitter aftertaste. Another door slammed shut. Defeated, Clara walked back through the park, her only refuge when life weighed her down. To her surprise, a small voice echoed across the playground. "Miss Clara!" Clara froze. Sophie stood there, her little hands waving frantically. A black car was parked nearby, sleek and imposing, its engine humming like a predator waiting in the shadows. Sophie ran toward her, hugging her knees tightly. "I told Daddy I wanted to see you again," she whispered. Clara's chest warmed despite the unease crawling up her spine. She glanced at the car, and there he was, the man from yesterday. Tall, commanding, with the same piercing eyes, only this time less hostile. He stepped out, his tailored suit cutting against the sunlight. His presence made the world around him fade into silence. "Miss Clara, isn't it?" he said, his voice deep, measured. "My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday." Clara blinked, unsure how to respond. Her instinct told her to run. Men like him, powerful, wealthy, lived in a world she could never belong to. But Sophie's small hand tugged hers, anchoring her in place. The man's eyes softened, just barely. "I'd like to talk." For the first time, Clara realized yesterday's encounter was no accident. It was the beginning of something that could alter her life forever. The cafe on the corner of 7th Avenue was quiet, filled with the faint hum of soft jazz and the occasional hiss of steaming milk. Clara sat uneasily at a table by the window, her fingers brushing the rim of her chipped teacup. Across from her sat the man, Sophie's father. His presence filled the space like gravity itself. His tailored charcoal suit, his silver watch that caught the light with every movement, his sharp jawline, all screamed wealth, power, and authority. Yet his eyes, those gray, calculating eyes, seemed to hold secrets deeper than fortune. "I'm Alexander Hale," he said at last, his tone calm but commanding. "CEO of Hale Enterprises." Clara blinked. She had heard the name before. Who hadn't? It was the kind of name whispered in news articles about billion-dollar mergers and headlines about ruthless takeovers. Yet here he was, sitting in a quiet cafe, speaking to her as if the entire world wasn't waiting on his call. He studied her with unsettling precision. "My daughter doesn't open up to people. Not easily. But she clung to you." Clara hesitated, her voice soft. "She was frightened, Mr. Hale. Children sense things. They carry feelings even when they don't speak them." Something flickered in his expression. Too fast for most to notice, but Clara did. It wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was pain. Quickly he buried it beneath his polished mask. "You think I frighten her?" he asked, his tone sharp. Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to lie, to say no, but honesty slipped out like a confession. "Sometimes love looks different to a child than it does to us. Maybe she doesn't understand the way you show it." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, the city roared, but inside, only the sound of Clara's nervous heartbeat remained. Then Alexander leaned back, his gaze softening just enough to betray the truth. "Her mother died when she was 3, he admitted quietly. "Since then, it's been just me. I've built empires, crushed competitors, expanded wealth beyond measure. But when it comes to Sophie," his voice faltered almost imperceptibly, "I don't know how to be enough." Clara's heart ached. Beneath the armor of money and power sat a father who had no idea how to bridge the distance between himself and his daughter. Sophie appeared then, skipping into the cafe, her smile radiant when she spotted Clara. She rushed into her arms, ignoring the world, ignoring her father's watchful eyes. Clara hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth, the innocence, the trust. Alexander watched, his mask cracking ever so slightly. In Clara, he saw something he couldn't buy, couldn't command. A gift he never expected, the ability to reach his daughter's heart. And in that quiet moment, Clara realized something too. This wasn't just about comforting a little girl anymore. She was standing at the edge of a story that could change not only Sophie's life, but her own. The next morning, Clara found herself standing before towering glass doors, their polished surface reflecting a skyline she never dreamed she'd touch. Hale Enterprises, 40 floors of steel, ambition, and untouchable power. She adjusted the strap of her faded handbag, a sharp contrast against the marble floors and golden elevators. A receptionist greeted her with professional precision, her smile rehearsed but kind. "Mr. Hale is expecting you." Inside the office, Alexander Hale stood by the window, his back turned. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not the tone of a father, but of a man who was used to commanding entire boardrooms. "I won't waste your time," he said, turning to face her. "Sophie trusts you. That means something I cannot ignore. I want you to stay in her life, permanently." Clara's heart raced. "Permanently?" He nodded, walking closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely vulnerable. "I'll provide you with everything: housing, salary, protection. Whatever you need. But in return, you'll become Sophie's anchor, her shield, the person she runs to when I cannot be there." The words hit Clara like a storm. She had been invisible all her life, another face in the crowd, scraping by with odd jobs, living in the shadows of survival. And now, the most powerful man in the city was offering her something she never imagined: stability, purpose, belonging. Still, doubt lingered. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why me? You could hire anyone." "Someone polished. Someone with more." Alexander's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "Because money can buy skill. It cannot buy heart. Sophie doesn't need another governess with perfect etiquette. She needs someone who sees her. And you already do." The truth of his words left Clara speechless. For the first time, she felt the weight of being chosen not for what she lacked, but for what she carried within. She glanced toward the door, and there was Sophie, clutching her stuffed bunny, smiling with the kind of trust that cut through every fear. Clara's chest tightened. How could she walk away from this child now? The decision settled over her quietly, almost naturally. She turned back to Alexander and nodded. "I'll stay." For the briefest moment, the mask slipped from his face again. Relief, almost gratitude, flickered in his eyes. But just as quickly he straightened, businesslike once more. "Good. Then your life, Miss Bennet, is about to change." And Clara knew it was true. She had stepped into a world far beyond her reach. A world where every kindness, every choice, every bond would carry consequences she had yet to understand. Weeks turned into months, and what began as an unlikely arrangement slowly reshaped into something deeper. Clara's small apartment was replaced with a warm room inside Alexander Hale's sprawling estate, but the heart of her life remained unchanged: Sophie. Every morning, Sophie would burst into her room with laughter instead of tears. Bedtime no longer meant fear, but stories whispered softly by Clara's side. The girl who once trembled on a park bench now ran freely across the gardens, her voice carrying like music through the halls. Alexander watched this transformation with quiet astonishment. At first he remained distant, burying himself in work. But each evening when he returned, he noticed something new. Sophie waiting by the door, holding Clara's hand, her smile brighter than any success he had ever built. One night, he lingered in the doorway as Clara read to Sophie, her voice calm, her presence grounding. Sophie's eyelids grew heavy, her bunny clutched against her chest, and before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Daddy, don't forget to say goodnight." The words struck him harder than any boardroom battle. Slowly, awkwardly, Alexander stepped forward, laying a hand on his daughter's head. It was a small gesture, but Sophie's smile told him it was everything. Later, in the quiet of the hallway, he turned to Clara. His voice was lower than she had ever heard. "I thought I could give her the world. I never realized the world she needed was something I couldn't build. You gave that to her." Clara met his gaze, unshaken. All she needed was love she could feel. And that's something you can give her too, if you let yourself. It was then that the walls around him, those built by grief, ambition, and pride, finally began to crumble. The story of Clara, the poor nanny, had never been about wealth or power. It was about a child's fragile heart, a father's redemption, and the quiet courage of a woman who refused to let her own struggles harden her. In the end, the collision of their worlds did not destroy them. It redefined them. Because family, as Clara had shown, is not bound by fortune or status, but by the choice to stay, to comfort and to love when it matters most. The story may be over, but the conversation starts now. Comment your reaction, and don't forget to like and follow.